For as long as I can remember, I was an afterthought. My sister, Elena, was the golden child, the one my parents doted on and praised relentlessly. Their favoritism wasn't subtle, it was a constant, glaring part of our lives. If Elena accused me of something, they believed her without question and punished me harshly. But if I tried to tell them what she did, even with proof, she'd get a light scolding. And somehow the conversation would always end with me being blamed for something else. It wasn't just the big things, it was the small, daily cruelties. My birthday cake always had to be her favorite flavor strawberry cheesecake, which I absolutely hated. My parents would pretend not to know, smiling as they handed me a slice. They bought her more toys, better clothes, and we always went where she wanted to go, even on my special days. It was like living in her shadow, a shadow that constantly reminded me I was second best. As a teenager, things got worse. Elena had always been a bully, but she mostly ignored me. However, a few years later, her own social life fell apart. She suddenly had no friends. I'm not sure why. Maybe her cruel behavior caught up to her, but we weren't close enough for me to know the details. What I did know was that I was fairly popular at school, and she noticed. My sister, who had always been a casual bully, suddenly saw me as someone she needed to tear down. She started accusing me and my friends of all sorts of things. My parents, of course, believed her. They would stop me from hanging out with anyone, saying things like, "Your sister says they're not good people," or "Why are you always trying to leave us? Why can't you be more like your sister and enjoy family time?" It was suffocating. I started to feel completely isolated. The only thing that saved me was my extended family. I had a lot of cousins in our hometown, and despite the age differences, we got along great. At one family gathering, a cousin asked me if I wanted to come to a party they were throwing. My heart sank. I told them I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. When they asked why, my younger self, without thinking, blurted out, "Because my sister doesn't have any friends, so I can't have any either." That simple, honest sentence was a bombshell. The story got back to the adults who apparently tore into my parents later that night. When my parents found out, they grounded me for a whole month for lying and embarrassing them. But after that month was up, things changed. They gave me a little more freedom in my life, and the endless accusations from my sister started to get less airtime. The punishment was harsh, but it was worth it. I finally had a little breathing room in my life. The incident with my extended family was a turning point, but not a full solution. The humiliation of the whole family knowing about Elena's lack of friends must have been too much for her, so she demanded to change schools. And my parents, of course, immediately agreed. They didn't care that the new school was farther away and cost more. They just wanted to protect their golden child from any discomfort. Elena did make friends at the new school, but the bullying didn't stop. It just changed. Her friends would come over and join in on the light teasing, as my parents called it, and it was still awful. I never invited my own friends over because my parents were such awful hosts, and Elena would always find a way to accuse them of stealing. My parents would believe her without a second thought. My cousins were still my lifeline. My parents never dared to treat family the way they treated me, so I became very close to them. They were my escape, the only people who saw me for who I was. Then I got my first boyfriend, a kind boy named Mark. I didn't want to bring him home, knowing what would happen, but my parents insisted. At one point, he went to look for me and came back with a look of irritation on his face. He told me Elena had cornered him, wearing a tiny, revealing outfit, batting her eyelashes and telling him how awful I was and how much better she was. Mark was a good guy, and he was completely put off by her. My sister, of course, told my parents a different story, that Mark had tried to flirt with her, but she, being the good sister, had refused. Guess who they believed? Mark wasn't perfect, but I believed him immediately. This was a pattern. Elena couldn't stand anyone being close to me. My parents, in their endless wisdom, prohibited me from dating such a horrible boy. I tried to keep the relationship a secret, but it was impossible, and it soon ended. I eventually got another boyfriend, but the same thing happened. Elena accused him of flirting with her, and my parents believed her again. I tried to point out that this was the second time, but they just shook their heads. They decided I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the pressure and fizzled out. It's probably worth mentioning that my parents were overweight and showed love through food, so Alina was also overweight. I, on the other hand, was always thin. The punishments for me often included no treats or snacks. Weight isn't what matters, of course, but my sister's personality was already rude and demanding. She never learned to work for anything. The fact that she wasn't a sexy model also made me confident my boyfriends weren't genuinely interested in her. In the end, my teenage years were a mess of unfair rules, broken relationships, and constant emotional warfare with my sister, all with my parents acting as their loyal soldiers. By the time I was in high school, I had given up on relationships and developed a reputation as someone who was fine with making out but refused to commit. It was easier that way. Time went on, and finally, it was Elena's turn to graduate. She got accepted into a small, not-so-great college without any scholarships. My parents, however, made a huge fuss. They bragged about her achievement to everyone and announced they would pay for everything. Tuition, dorms, books, everything. I was relieved. I hoped that, with her gone, my life would get easier. But it didn't. She would come home every other weekend, and every time something would go missing from my room, or she would think of some new problem to cause me. My strict curfews and rules remained in place. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my own upcoming graduation. I was only a year younger than Elena. She sat me down and, with a sad, caring look on her face, told me that because they were spending so much money on Elena's college, there was no money left for mine. She said it would be better for me to start working right after high school and wait until Elena was finished with university to see if they could afford to help me. She even told me that if I decided to stay at home, I would have to pay for all my own stuff, plus part of the bills and rent. I calmly pointed out that I could get student loans. My mom immediately objected, saying that because they cared so much about me and because I had such bad judgment with my boyfriends, they would have to decide if a college was even worth me getting into debt for. It was a flimsy excuse, but I didn't push back. I simply said, okay. My mom looked shocked. I think she expected me to throw a tantrum so they would have an excuse to never help me, but I didn't. I just told her I understood their position, thanked them for their care, and that was that. My dad tried the same conversation later, but I gave him the same emotionless response. You see, after a lifetime of their terrible parenting, I had no expectations when it came to my education. I knew they would find an excuse not to pay. So while they were busy telling me what I couldn't have, I had been preparing my own way out for a long, long time. Since I could barely go out and my friendships were slim, I had a lot of time to study. And study I did. I saw college as my only chance to be free, to escape their control for good. The time came, and I worked my butt off. I earned a full scholarship to a decent college. It wasn't an Ivy League school or anything, but it was a solid program that would give me a career. I knew Elena would hate it and try to stop me through my parents. So the moment I told my parents, I also posted my achievement on social media, making sure to publicly thank them for all their support. Now, they couldn't forbid me from going without having to explain to the whole family why. At first, they were even a little proud and bragged about it. But then I guess Elena got to them because they quickly changed their tune. They started asking if I was sure I wanted to go, letting slip that Elena wasn't doing well in her own college program. They told me that since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I would definitely suffer worse. I just stood my ground. They weren't happy, but they couldn't do anything. College was my savior, my ticket to a new life. College was my savior. I started being genuinely happy. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could always use the excuse of no money to avoid going home too often. It was a good distance, both physically and emotionally. During this time, I made sure to avoid introducing any man to them. The last thing I needed was another relationship ruined by my sister's lies. I also found out that Alina had dropped out of her college. My parents never mentioned it, but they would have made a huge fuss if she had graduated. She moved back home, paying no bills or rent, and started working at the same company as my mom, thanks to strings being pulled. They presented this to me as a point of pride, saying how resourceful Alina was. All I could think was that some things never change. Then I met Alex, my now husband. He was different from anyone I had ever known. You know how people say, if I were in that situation, I'd have done something? Well, Alex is the type of person who actually does. I'm the type who's a doormat in any situation and then can't sleep at night wishing I had done something or said something witty. My husband is the guy who claps back immediately. He loves drama and loves to resolve it. He's the kind of guy who, if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive and forget. He's just doing something worse for revenge. I fell in love with him not despite this, but because of it. I love that he did what I was incapable of doing due to my upbringing. And he treated people well, as long as they did the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony itself, mostly because we'd rather spend the money on a dream honeymoon to Europe. As for the location, since his family was spread out and mine was all in my hometown, we decided to do it there. Naturally, my parents soon demanded to meet him. I felt a surge of panic. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad, and I was having a hard time refusing. Alex looked like I had just canceled Christmas when I told him I couldn't say no. He was so excited he'd already been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality voice recorder he could hide in his pocket to record everything. He was stoked, imagining all the ways he could shut down Alina's inevitable flirting and insults, then use the recording as proof for my cousins. I tried to warn him, but he just smiled. So off he went, alone and excited, to meet them. When he came back, he was euphoric. Babe, you won't believe the awful things they wanted. We can screw them over so bad. There's so many possibilities. I was confused. I didn't understand what had happened. He had gone there expecting to be provoked, but came back with something much, much worse. The conversation had not gone as he planned at all, and the revenge he now had in mind was far more creative and, as he put it, epic. The tone becomes a mix of disbelief and dark amusement, reflecting the absurdity of the family's request and the beginning of her revenge. Alex sat me down and, with a mischievous grin on his face, started recounting the conversation. He'd gone there ready for a fight, but what he got was something else entirely. After some grumbling about him not being, quote, good enough for me, my parents proclaimed that they were willing to pay for our entire wedding. My heart skipped a beat. This was a massive, unexpected gift, but it came with a single bizarre condition. Your sister will walk down the aisle at your wedding first, he explained, still grinning, in a wedding dress. They said it's not fair for the younger sister to get married first, so Elena should at least have the experience of it. In your venue, with pictures, and they'd even get her a cake. I was speechless. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. My parents, after a lifetime of making my life about Elena, were now demanding that even my wedding, the one moment that was supposed to be mine, had to be about her. The distance had made me forget just how far they would go. My throat tightened, but Alex's hand on my knee grounded me. He recounted their offer with so much enthusiasm, so much focus on the revenge aspect, that my initial hurt quickly turned into a cold, hard resolve. I needed to hear the recording. Alex wisely told me it was better to listen to him first to avoid misunderstanding. His brain had short-circuited when they made the offer, but after rebooting, something in his soul whispered to him, "String these idiots along." He told me he'd acted like he needed to think about it and see how I would react, then he'd run out of there before he could give away his plans. "We can screw them over so bad," he'd said. "There are so many possibilities." I was shocked, but not in a bad way. The distance had softened my memories of how bad they were, and I never thought they would go this far. The thought of their proposal had the potential to send me into a bad headspace, but Alex's insistence on the revenge angle helped me from spiraling. We had a blast thinking up ways to get back at them, from ridiculously over-the-top ideas to ones we thought were feasible. We eventually called his brother, who was much more level-headed. He scolded us for even considering such a dramatic revenge plot. But he knew he couldn't convince us otherwise, so he helped us refine the plan. We wanted to give them a wrong venue address and a bunch of other complicated ideas. He explained that those would be hard to pull off and could even get us sued, so we settled on the most benign plan: act like we agreed to their ridiculous demands, then hire security to not let Elena in. But that was just the start. The real plan, the part that was truly pro-revenge, was mostly Alex's idea, with me egging him on. He wanted to use their offer to get them to pay for a wedding that was far more extravagant than we ever wanted, all while subtly humiliating them along the way. "We'll call it back payment for emotional damages," he joked. I loved it. Alex was enjoying the whole trick more than he was planning our actual wedding. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming with joy at the thought of a whole day of dealing with my parents. But here we were. And so began the months of deception. My parents and Elena thought they were tricking me into an embarrassing situation, while Alex and I were milking them for all they were worth. Alex went back to my parents and pretended to be on their side. He said he'd probed me, and I wasn't okay with Elena walking down the aisle in a wedding dress. However, he claimed he didn't see the issue, and not wanting the family to fall apart, he would help them do it. He even suggested a compromise. They'd help pay for things so I would feel even more pressure to not make a scene at the wedding. My parents, he said, looked shocked, and Elena literally started skipping with joy. It was accepted. The best part of the deception was how Alex used my parents' past accusations against me. He told them that because of my bad judgment and past boyfriends, I was distrustful and controlling and liked to check his phone and stuff. He told them that for any discussions about Elena's plan, nothing could ever be put in writing. My parents, of course, believed it because it confirmed their pre-existing beliefs about me. And the three of them, my parents and Elena, fell for it completely. My parents, who didn't want to pay for my wedding, were now being tricked into paying for an extravagant one. Alex and I had considered a courthouse wedding to save money for our honeymoon, but now we were having this huge, expensive celebration and barely spending a dime. Alex would convince my parents to give in to our preferences, saying, "We don't want to abuse your goodwill by making you pay for the best options," which, of course, prompted Elena to demand that they get the best. This happened with everything: the menu, the photographer, the flowers. Alex would say, "Anna wanted these plain flowers, but it's a shame we can't afford the beautiful ones you like." My parents would then insist on paying for the most expensive option. The only real snag we hit was with the wedding dress. My parents wanted me to wear a hideous dress that was more my style, and they sent me a message about it, which was a breach of Alex's no writing rule. We were gonna have me refuse by text, but Alex, being the pro-revenge guy he is, went over there and pretended to be conflicted. Elena even suggested ruining my desired dress so I would be forced to wear the one they wanted. Alex pretended to agree. I got to find it all incredibly funny. I guess I have a warped sense of humor. I was so used to being a doormat that the thought of being painted as this controlling and dangerous person was a source of great amusement. During all this time, Elena did try to flirt with Alex, but he acted conflicted to really sell the lie that he was on their side. He would also pretend to tell them things about me without my knowledge, which further cemented their belief that he was with them. But he never told them one key detail, that we had hired security. That was our ace in the hole, the secret weapon for the wedding day. We had our back payment for emotional damages, and we had a plan for the final act of revenge. The day finally came, my wedding day. The day my parents and sister had been meticulously planning to ruin. Their plan was simple and, in their minds, brilliant. Since the bride always comes out late, they would have Elena arrive at that precise moment to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it. She would walk down the aisle in her wedding dress, and by the time anyone could react, it would be too late. They believed my dress was ruined, a detail Alex had made them believe, so they thought I would be forced to wear a different, less impressive outfit. The guests arrived, and Alex and I watched the crowd with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. Our real security, a professional-looking bodyguard, was initially hidden so as not to spook anyone. As my parents' and sister's friends arrived, they were only greeted by a woman with a list, checking names. The bodyguard was brought out only after my parents had settled in, our secret weapon now in plain sight. The moment arrived. My dad stood at the entrance, waiting for me. My bridesmaids, who were in on the plan, were all in place. A friend of mine, who was not in the wedding party, but was as eager for the drama as Alex, had a specific role. She texted me to get ready, not to create suspicion if Alex or the bridesmaids started texting. The bridal song began. The massive church doors opened, and I entered holding a beautiful bouquet of the most expensive flowers my parents had paid for. My dad's face went white with shock. He tried to look behind me, searching for Elena, but he couldn't see the entrance from where we were. He had no idea what had happened. Just then, his phone rang. The caller ID was my sister, Elena. He looked at me, a panicked, desperate expression on his face, and with a mumbled, "Something came up," he dropped my arm and walked away, leaving me standing there alone at the beginning of the aisle. A gasp went through the crowd. Murmurs and confused whispers filled the room. This was my moment. The tears weren't hard to find. I was genuinely hurt that he'd abandoned me. My friend, the one who was in on the plan, shouted loudly, "What happened? What did he mean it wasn't supposed to be you there?" My heart sank even lower as I said, my voice trembling, He told me it wasn't supposed to be me there." I was following our plan exactly, making him look as bad as possible. My husband and I had agreed that if my dad ever abandoned me, this was the exact line I was to say. The friend, in her role, shouted back, "What does that mean?" and ran off, ostensibly to check. This was our signal to our bodyguard, who had stopped my dad from coming back to the ceremony. It worked perfectly. A few minutes later, my mom also left, and chaos ensued. Then, Alex's dad, a kind man who had also been forewarned, came running over to me. His desperate run to me made me smile. He took my arm and, with a few words of comfort, walked me down the aisle. I smiled at my husband, who was waiting for me at the other end. He gave me a reassuring look, as if saying, "I'll deal with this." We got married without any further issues. My parents never came back, and I spent the night of my wedding celebrating with all the guests, knowing that my revenge was already in full swing. The wedding ceremony was a success, but the real show, the one we had been planning for months, happened just outside. The summary I got from friends, family, and the security guy later was more satisfying than any wedding gift. My sister, in her full wedding dress, arrived and was immediately stopped by our security guard. He calmly told her she must be at the wrong venue because there was already a bride. My dad tried to threaten him, claiming he was a fake, but our bodyguard stood his ground. He said he would gladly call the police as he was hired by us and was just doing his job. My dad, realizing he was losing control, started screaming for the guard to let Elena in. That's when my friend came over. She started yelling and insulting Elena, asking what she thought she was doing. My mom soon joined the scene, and a crowd of guests, curious about the drama, followed. Everyone was horrified that my parents had even attempted this. People started yelling at them, berating them for their actions. When my parents and Alina claimed it was all Alex's idea and that he was in on it, he walked over with a perfectly confused expression on his face. He looked at them and, in a clear voice, denied everything. He later told me he was using a gaslight gatekeeper girl boss tactic, which made me laugh. He demanded proof of their ridiculous plan. Of course they couldn't provide any. All their text messages were about normal wedding decisions. He tore into them about being terrible parents and trying to ruin our wedding, then turned and walked back to me. Nobody believed them. The venue had cameras, but they wouldn't show me the recording. My husband, however, told me that some people filmed parts of it. The footage of my parents and sister being screamed at and torn apart by our guests was one of the best wedding gifts I'd ever received. My mom was crying, my dad's face kept turning from purple to white, and my sister was on the floor screaming and kicking like a toddler. They were eventually told to leave, and my dad had to physically drag Elena out. She refused to leave the ground. The rest of the night was perfect. Guests went out to hear the drama and came back with updates, but everyone was incredibly kind to me. My husband kept up the forced angry face for a while, but eventually he broke out in smiles again, a clear sign that our plan had worked perfectly. After we got back from our honeymoon, my parents and Elena tried to contact me again. My husband, being the strategic genius he is, insisted on keeping a paper trail. A smart move, because Elena soon sent me an unhinged text message. It didn't make much sense, but she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake who fooled them for months, and said I hoped I'd get cheated on by him. Alex took my phone, screenshotted the call logs and messages, and sent it all to our family group chat. He also sent screenshots of messages from my parents demanding I pick up the phone, where they called him names. He then wrote a message in the chat begging my family for help, saying he was being harassed by them constantly after they failed to ruin our wedding. He asked our family not to share our location to prevent them from sending my sister over, and claiming he had agreed to pretend to sleep with her in our honeymoon suite. I have a feeling he just made that up for dramatic effect, but our family assured him they'd handle it, and since then we've had peace. So that was it. After years of being pushed around, accused of things, and never being believed, seeing my parents and sister get torn apart by our family and friends was one of the best wedding gifts I could have received. We had a blast, and my husband's forced, angry face eventually broke into smiles, a clear sign that our plan had worked perfectly. After we returned from our honeymoon, my parents and Elena tried to contact me. My husband, being the strategic genius he is, insisted on keeping a paper trail. A smart move, because Elena soon sent me an unhinged text message. It didn't make much sense, but she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake who fooled them for months, and said she hoped I'd get cheated on by him. Alex took my phone, screenshotted the call logs and messages, and sent it all to our family group chat. He also sent screenshots of messages from my parents demanding I pick up the phone, where they called him names. He then wrote a message in the chat begging my family for help, saying he was being harassed by them constantly after they failed to ruin our wedding. He asked our family not to share our location to prevent them from sending my sister over, and claiming he had agreed to pretend to sleep with her in our honeymoon suite. I have a feeling he just made that up for dramatic effect, but our family assured him they'd handle it, and since then, we've had peace. Do I know why they treated me like this all my life? I've been asked this question a lot. I've pondered it for years and still don't have a definite answer. I tried asking when I was young, but they just denied any difference and scolded me for being spoiled. I've considered many possibilities, but my best guess is this. I was unplanned. They took a while to have Elena, so she was their miracle child. But given our small age difference, They probably didn't expect to have another child so soon. They were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. They weren't well off, so the extra expense likely didn't help. They probably resented me. But that's just my conjecture. In the end, I've accepted that the reason doesn't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted no matter what. Did they really think their plan would work? My husband and I have a theory. We think Elena threw a tantrum over me getting married first, and my parents made that outlandish proposition. They never intended to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept. By suggesting it and being refused, they could look like the good guys to Elena while having an excuse not to give me a dime. But then my husband accepted it, and they couldn't backtrack without risking Elena turning on them. It's been a few months since the dust settled. We have no contact with my parents or sister, and that's the strange part. I don't hate them. I thought I would, but I don't. The bitterness never came. Something changed in me after I got my revenge and signed those wedding documents. There was no euphoric moment, just a slow, quiet return to myself. The self I hadn't seen in years. I started painting again. Bad landscapes mostly, but I loved it. It reminded me that doing something purely for joy is an act of rebellion. I made new friends, people who don't ask what happened, but ask what's next. My husband and I are stronger than ever. We're a team, and he loves me for who I am. He loves my quirks and my doormat nature, but he also pushes me to find my voice, something I'm slowly learning. I didn't need closure from them because I gave it to myself. And that was the most peaceful goodbye I've ever known.